Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good. Last time I did one of these events, the mic almost exploded on me, and it was great drama. Like that. You were here last time that happened. Thank you all for coming to CSIS tonight for what's going to be a great event. My name is Rick Ozzie Nelson, and I'm Director of the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Program at CSIS. And we thank Rob for being here, of course, and for all of you attending. And we are webcasting live as well. I know we have a couple folks that will be on watching this as well. This is interesting. First of all, I want you to know that Rob and I coordinated our ties. So I chose orange and he chose pink, just to throw you off and keep you on your game.
And all the women go, "Oh no, you didn't. That's terrible."
But we're absolutely thrilled to have Rob here. We actually ended up beginning our relationship. So those of you that don't think social media is worthwhile, we actually met on Twitter. Believe it or not, we were in the same Twitter circles, and they overlap. And we had a conversation on Twitter, and I said, "Hey, you know, this book sounds really interesting, and your ideas sound interesting." And he said, "Yeah, what do you think? Let's have a conversation." So, so he sent me a copy of the book signed. Which is part of the deal, and I said, "Hey, well, we'll hold an event at CSIS with you and give you some more exposure and talk about an issue that I find interesting and something a little bit different than we normally talk about here at CSIS." So there is power in the social network and in productive power, and I think that's one of the things that Rob talks about here. You're not here to listen to me, but I do want to give a little bit of background on Rob for those of you. I know a lot of his friends are in the audience here, but I do want to give a little bit of background, and I have the prepared remarks. But many of you know Rob, former Navy SEAL. I don't know if you're ever former, right? You're always a SEAL.
Guys that survive the 20 years get to be called retired.
Retired Navy SEAL.
But never ex.
Since retiring from the military, he stayed very active in the defense and national security infrastructure. Many of you may know him from his Think Like the Adversary workshop, which he's given across, not only inside the military, but across the government, as well as to the intel community and Fortune 500 companies. He's founder and CEO of Vodabo Consulting, as well as Chief Security Officer for the All Humanity Group. And prior to this, he served as on the Deputy Secretary of the Defense's Senior Integration Team and led the DoD's Red Team operations as his chairman of the National Security Subcommittee on the Homeland Security Foundation for America. It's a mouthful.
In my free time.
But which is what we talked about, the challenges, because Rob is working full-time, and this is his part-time job right now. His hobby is writing books and changing people's lives, which is an interesting thing. And that's what we want to hear about here today. One of the things about the book is it's more than just a simple conversation about the nature of conflict and peace. In fact, it's interesting that we're having this book event on the same night as the last presidential debate, where we're seeing a lot of conflict, and we should have that discussion in the United States. But there are a lot of people that feel very strongly about their issues and very strongly about how the future of the United States should go. And I think Rob does a great job of not only talking about the larger strategic picture and the strategic issues of conflict, but what spoke to me mostly was the interpersonal conflict, how you can take these lessons and not try to change basically the relationships between two countries or two groups, but how you can really change what you do as a person, as an individual. Because I always feel that's something I can actually affect, is, control what I control and how I respond to folks. And I was really appreciated the book. Again, it was very accessible to me. It wasn't some theory that didn't relate to me. Particularly appreciated his references to people like Leslie Nielsen and Denzel Washington. Shows where my mind is, and other popular cultural elements like that. So, but most importantly, what it comes from is from his background as a Navy SEAL. And we see Navy SEALs, in many ways, for better or worse, epitomized by their actions in Afghanistan, particularly the bin Laden raid, where it's a lot of heavy force and coming in and taking kinetic action to achieve the strategic objectives of the United States. But I think what Rob shows us in this book here is it's a lot more behind that, a lot more to the character and to the individuals that serve in the force and serve in the government. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Rob has to say about this. We're going to do this in a very informal manner. Rob's going to speak for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation. I have some questions that I want to ask him, and then we're going to turn it over to you for questions and answers. So Rob, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you very much. I'll go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you all for coming out here, and thank you in TV land. We're going to have to be facing each other at some point.
So have a conversation.
Comfortable. Get relaxed like a conversation should be. I see a lot of faces I know from all over the States, all over my career, all over to Twitterverse, and that's really where the message of Powerful Peace is coming from. I call it common ground. We have a lot of, as Ozzy and I were talking about before coming out here, we have a lot of conflict today, interpersonal, males, females, blacks, whites, Republicans, Democrats. We're seeing a major thing happening tonight, discussion on the conflict that we have in the United States. I think that we have a bipolar political structure happening in the States right now. It's not a political system. It's a bipolarized, not transpartisan at all. And my good friend Michael back here, who's sitting at the table, has coined the term transpartisanship, and I recommend that we start using that a little bit more. But this isn't a political discussion at all. In fact, I call it apolitical nature of the book. As Ozzy said, I was in the teams for my career. Before the Navy, I was working in the Adirondacks as a canoe guide. So I love the theme of flow and the water, and martial arts over many, many years has taught a lot of concepts about, as you know from Eastern philosophy, about hard and soft are sort of paradox. We have a chapter here called Paradox, actually, which goes into women's issues, which brings me all the way back to the pink tie and Pinktober. So there's a quick nod out there for breast cancer awareness, and as everybody in TV land is aware, I don't wear ties. Richard Branson, I guess, cuts ties off of people when he meets them, and he won't have to worry about that when he meets me. But this was a special occasion, and it holds the mic. So the 6 years since I retired, I've been all over the conflict zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. Spent more years. Actually, my wife counted on our 4th anniversary, put out some calendars and said, I've circled the trips you've been on for these first 4 years. Count up the number of months you've been home. It's like a quiz. And I took the quiz, and I succeeded, unfortunately, because I counted 12 months out of 48 I was home. So this is the origin of the lessons on peace from a lifetime at war. When I retired, we've been together 15 years, and I was home for 7 of those altogether. I've worked in about 34 countries, and I've met a lot of people. I've eaten a lot of foods. My platoon nickname is the GOAT. By God's grace, I can eat anything that has been food or is food. And that has helped. I'll give you an example right off the top of my head. When I was in Uzbekistan, we had a pickup platoon of SEALs to go out there for 6 weeks to teach combat, and, intelligence process, and counterterrorism in general. The food was so bad that all 9 of my colleagues got very, very sick. They were down for 2 days at a time with unmentionable conditions. And I, as the Russian linguist who was speaking to the commander and interpreting for the guys, as the Turkish linguist who was speaking for the guys, and who came from the interesting side note, the people in Uzbekistan, the boys back from the villages, didn't speak Russian, didn't have to. The Soviets never squeezed that far back, and so the Uzbek boys in the back villages could just be Uzbeks. And speaking Uzbek, and that's so close to Turkish, it's a Turkic language, and they didn't speak English or Russian, so I was the only guy that could communicate with them except for the other Uzbeks. So in that process, the old Spetsnaz commander's running the camp, and he came to me one day and said, "Your men are getting sick." I said, "That's true." And he said, he didn't speak any English, and he said, "Do you think it's the cook? Because I can punish the cook." And I realized what he was saying. Hamid was the guy, he was a friend of mine, little Uzbek guy, and we're buddies. I'd hang out with him in the kitchen-like area. By that I mean no running, no heated water, no soap within 50 miles. And his grinder had yesterday's meat always hanging out of it before I put new meat through. So, but it was an enclosure. 3 sides were enclosed on a 4-sided object in that screen area. Anyway, I said, "Oh, no," and diplomacy skills come hard won, because most of my lessons from being around the world have been stupid mistakes that I experienced the consequences for executing. So I would say a sound in Turkey when I was learning Turkish, and I would be beaten or chased away by old ladies because it said something anatomically inappropriate to discuss in public. But that helped, with the Uzbeks. So I had seen the Russian commander, the Soviet Spetsnaz commander. He actually helped invade Afghanistan back in '79. He said, "I think I can punish the cook," and I realized he was going to beat my friend, who I had seen him beating soldiers just the day before, soldiers who had to stand at attention while they were smacked really hard for correction, because the Soviet style, the Soviet model, says if you don't know who did the bad thing, just punish somebody, because the guy that did it sees it and stops. Everybody wins. You don't have to waste all that time finding the right guy. So I said, no, it's not the cook, because we have I'm dancing in my head, doing a little tap dance, a soft shoe. I said, because the reason all 9 SEALs, except me, who I'm eating these meals every day, they're all sick because Americans are weak, not like good, strong Uzbeks. American men, they look strong, but they're just inside, the Constitution is not like the good Soviet Russian man. He's like, good point. And that concludes our clown show for tonight. I wanted to make sure I open up talking about who I really am, because who I really am, as everybody who's watching knows, and all those who know me here, is not some guy in a tie on a stage somewhere where he belongs, because I belong among the individuals who are experiencing conflict, who are experiencing fighting in the household. We had a couple of calls over the past couple of weeks. One family wrote to me and said, "You saved our marriage." And as Ozzy said, it's interpersonal as well as international. The fundamental nature of conflict, of disagreement, is universal. It's just raised on different levels. And I'm not such a simplistic person that I would say that there's not more nuance and more sophisticated problems in international relations, but Joe and I wrote and said, keep this stuff up, I want to hear more of it. And that's the guy that invented the idea of smart power. And I'm here talking about applying smart power, applied smart power. When you get an Olympian like that back in the message, you know we're on the right track. So this lady wrote to me and said, "You saved our marriage." We read the book, we're on the verge of a breakup, and began applying some of the ideas, and we're stronger than ever. Another young man wrote to me and said, "You gave me back my dad, because my dad and I were estranged. We were on really hard terms for a long time, and then I read the book and I started thinking, maybe I can consider his perspective. Maybe we can find some common ground." We applied that, and next thing you know, he's diagnosed with a near-critical, near-fatal illness, and I could have lost him. He could have died, and I would have been in that horrible, angry place, and that would have been the last things we ever said to each other. So these, as Ozzy and I were talking about upstairs, it's being applied in Kentucky right now by a wonderful lady named Jane Poland, who is a high school teacher who got an advanced copy of Powerful Peace about 6 months ago and said, this needs to be in the school. This needs to be among the youth. And I'd been saying the same thing to the publisher from a couple of years ago when we talked about markets and all this business part of it. And I said, we need to get this in the eyes and the minds of kids. Let the youth hear this, because it'll establish a better way forward to have less undoing, if you will, going forward. So she's teaching a Powerful Peace course right now at their high school, and it's being received so strongly by the kids. They're doing blog postings and taking it on a personal mission. The art class in the school is now jumping on the bandwagon, and we're hoping to infect in the most positive possible way across all spheres.
It was such a tremendous idea that you have here and this thought. I think about all the endorsements that you have, which says a lot. I mean, these are some pretty significant people: Fran Townsend, Brian Losey, Peter Bergen, Joe and I, very influential folks in their sphere have all endorsed your ideas. When I write, I'm lucky if I get my research assistant to endorse my ideas. But where along your career, when did you have kind of the aha moment that you said, you know what, this all comes together, I have this idea, I'm going to write this book? When did that happen for you, and how did it happen? You just kind of run into it.
In 2005, I was writing an essay while I was still in uniform. Wrote an essay for a U.S. agency, and they wanted some basic writing samples for some selection processes. And I wrote a piece called Understanding, because I had a platform. I had the soapbox, and I was going to use it. I wasn't going to give them a writing sample and say, hey, I know where I goes before E. I was going to say, here's what I think. And I said, here's what I think. And I called it Understanding. And it went like that, because it was a U.S. government agency. And what value is there in being understanding, especially when you're talking about a DOD guy? What is that? Understanding? What kind of? You probably wear pink ties or something, dude. Understanding has no place in this war and peace and manliness and military and uniforms and boots. I retitled it "Becoming Your Enemy," and it got really popular. So the same understanding that I put into understanding was that we need to understand the whole picture of a situation in which we're trying to solve a problem. We need to understand the root causes for ways of thinking. We need to understand grievances and neglect and those functions of life that all of us appreciate. Many of us, most of us in this room enjoy a lot of things we take for granted every day. I take for granted having access to clean water, or being able to go to the bathroom when I need to, and be able to do just normal life functions without having to. In the case, back to women's issues, in the case of in parts of Africa, women are in a. I've read that some development projects involve bringing plumbing into the village so the women don't have to go outside the village at night, because they are always raped when they leave the village at night. Not there's a danger of being raped when they leave the village at night. Always, every single time. We have conflict situations around the world right now and in recent years in which there were campaigns of thousands of rapes as a weapon of war. I'll probably loop back to this women's issues thing again and again during the night because it's Pinktober. But the men are, in many cultures, are responsible, have a sense of responsibility, have a socially designed responsibility for their wives and daughters. And when there's a campaign of institutionalized rape, and yes, I say it a lot because I want to shake some people up, I want people to be uncomfortable, they're affecting the men. The armies that roar across the landscape with this kind of intent are actually attacking the men, because a man who feels that sense of obligation to protect the women in his life will either fight to the death and lose rational ability to fight well, or he'll flee with them to protect them. So you've undermined the effectiveness of an entire army military force. So I did the understanding article, and it went over like a lead balloon because it was a U.S. government agency and affecting DOD. Understanding had no place in this world. But then I read, a couple of years went by. I'd gone, as you mentioned, Ozzy, I was in the service. I was all over the world in uniform. Then I retired and went right back to Iraq for about 13 months. Then I came back. Then I went right back to Afghanistan because I wanted to be where I was relevant, where I was making a difference, where I could see the commander's eyes, hearing an idea from me, and say, you know what, that makes sense. And there were more than a few of those ideas that made sense when I could get the direct face-to-face contact with the person who has to make that hard decision about a campaign. And in 2008, in Baghdad, I started writing Powerful Peace, a blog, under the name Jack Oatman. Look up Jack Oatman. You'll find it's O-A-T-M-O-N. There's a whole bunch of work out there by me. Doesn't sound like it's spelled right, but the acronym, if you remind me at the end, I'll describe it for you and break it out for you as a encrypted code. So in 2008, I started writing this blog because I had to get the same ideas out there. I felt compelled, and by this time I'd heard of Joe Nye. By this time I'd heard of soft power and smart power, and I realized what I was writing about in 2005 was smart power, talking about understanding the whole scope of a conflict, the whole scope of a problem, understanding as much as possible about the underlying causes and situation, which Mike Flynn, who was the intel boss in Afghanistan a couple of years ago, released the paper called Fixing Intel. A lot of you know about that document. I immediately jumped on it, and I went and talked to him, told him about this. He said, that's great, keep it going. I want to get more of this out there. Because Fixing Intel examines the problem where we in the DOD attack red forces, and we perceive ourselves as blue forces. And if we look at the massive pile of green forces, or local civilians, we consider them to be more of an obstacle to our progress. They're kind of in the way. Like, if you get out of the way, we could deal with this red force problem. Not understanding that on a daily basis, we're creating red forces in some cases by some missteps. As Bob Gates said, are we creating more than we're killing? That's a quote from him. I've said it many times. So I wanted to keep getting the ideas out there. It wasn't a one-time epiphany. It was a perpetual sense that there was something that had to be said over the years. And finally, in 2009, the blog had been rolling for a while, and I was still Jack Oatman because I'm in Baghdad talking about terrorism and evolved counterterrorism, and I didn't want terrorists to be killing my wife in the U.S. while I was over there using my real name talking about terrorists. It would have been just too low-hanging fruit, if you will. So then I continued to blog and realized that I had a lot of friends saying, you need to capture this. So a lot of what you read in Powerful Peace is expanded, is evolved extractions from the original blog and the ideas that came across in real time.
How many of the ideas and thoughts, concepts did you have, running around in your head before joining the Navy, and then before most of the conflict of the last 10 years when you were involved in? Were they there? Those thoughts were there. You just didn't know how to put them together. Then you were involved in the conflicts over the last 10 years, and that solidified them, or did it really come together when you were exposed to the conflicts of the last 10 years?
That's a really insightful question. I knew when I was a kid that there was something about humanity. There was some common ground. There was some common thread running through our species that we would willfully overlook so that we could have fights. We would willfully, look at the comfort. Again, the comfort of America. Most folks in America are in a very comfortable state and don't understand actual deprivation. I've witnessed actual deprivation in 30 countries. And it's a very unpleasant sight, actual deprivation, watching people suffer for real. Not suffering like, as Mel Brooks said, tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die. So it's all from a matter of perspective, of context. And deprivation that we feel, and today, if I can't get a cab and I'm running late, that's a real serious problem. Yeah. And some people can't get a piece of bread for the day to eat, and that is their real serious problem, and mine pales in comparison. So as a teen, I realized, and I grew up in the kill a commie for mommy, better dead than red days. That was my upbringing. And I said, that doesn't sound quite right. I know now, and I've trained many people. I've trained many people around the world. I've trained Arabs and Russians and guys around Asia. I've trained a lot of people and many people in the U.S. in Russian language, in expert shooting, in navigation, in a universe of skills and abilities. I've trained people, and I understand we have to reach them at a certain level. So the necessary, if you will, propaganda of any government to communicate to its people a certain unifying theme of them. It's not something I condemn, because we have to use that tool of identifying the other force in order to mobilize our force, because there's a real war and we really have to be ready for that war when it happens. But kill a commie for mommy just sounded kind of goofy to me, and I thought, one day as I got into the Soviet path for the Navy, I was going to go off and become a Soviet SME, a special subject matter expert for Soviets and Russian language, Russian culture, and everything. And I had a feeling that even though the Spetsnaz was my mortal enemy, and they probably had laser beams coming out of their eyes, and they had horns on their heads, I was going to probably work with them one day somehow. Once I got into the teams, I was going to be a SEAL, and I was going to work with Spetsnaz. Well, what happened? I talked about Uzbekistan already, but even cooler than that, a couple of years earlier, was we had a PASOK conference in Hawaii. I was at the Hawaii SEAL team, and we had the Soviet or the Russian SOCOM. So the Russians' #1 special forces guy in the world came to Hawaii, and I finagled my way in to be his interpreter, because that's what I do. I finagled in, and I was interpreter, and I said, "Hey, dude, come to my house for a barbecue, hot dogs and beer," and he did. So we're having hot dogs and beer in the backyard. So you couldn't work any more closely with Spetsnaz than having a hot dog and beer in your backyard with the guy that was in charge of all the guys that would have had to kill me 8 years earlier. And that was a really interesting validation, again, like we were talking about earlier, a validation of these ideas, because a lot of it is not common sense. I think it runs counterintuitive to the common thinking, but it's not. A lot of us understand when you have paradigm shifts. I talk about Stephen Covey a lot, and not to put anybody off who's been 7 Habits to death, but I'm a huge fan of his teaching, because I believe there's a lot of fundamental truth in it. And he talks about the paradigm shift. By the way, I give credit, Stephen Covey passed away about 3 months ago, rest him. So But he talked about paradigm, the way you look at the world, what you perceive reality to be. There's 7 billion of those, 7 billion unique personal worldviews. And when my worldview gets too rigid and too fixed in place, I can do things like try to murder 250,000 people in a tower in New York City, as Yusuf did, because my perspective was so ferociously ingrained, or bin Laden himself, as I talk about in the front of the book. When 9/11 happened, I was teaching Arab SEALs how to kill terrorists at a little base in the Middle East. We were there on September 10th and weeks before that, and on September 11th, it was evening. We'd finished our training. We got a call from the TV room, and all the Americans and Arabs came out. We sat down and watched one of the towers burning in New York, live TV from the satellite feed. And we sat down and watched it, and then we saw the second tower get hit. And we knew that everything we'd done for training was now complete. You know, you don't have to get a diploma to know your training is complete. It's time to move on now. The next phase began with the second plane. Really, it started with the first plane, but it really, you know, we all got the message. We all got our marching orders with the second plane. So we sat and watched it for 3 hours together, and that's why I used that as the first chapter of the book, describing my experience watching Arab terrorists murder thousands of innocent people sitting on either side with Arab SEALs who would have given their lives at that moment to stop what was happening or to save my life. As I talk in the book, there are missions I've been on in which I was protected by foreign forces who would have given their lives to protect me. If these guys are called ragheads or fill in the blank, there's all kinds of terms of disrespect that we use commonly that are not in our best interests if we're trying to move forward in the world. I look at it that way quite simply. My life is better off if I'm on good terms with all men, as one Bible verse gives. Be on good terms with all men because your own life will be better. It's a simple concept, but it's not commonly practiced because it's too easy to be jerks.
Now, for those of you that haven't read the book reads like this too. There's a joke, and then there's a really serious thing, and then there's a joke. So it's okay to laugh at the jokes. Please do. It's interesting that you say that. By the way, we're going to have books available for sale in the back at the end, and Rob's going to sign some of those. You know, the idea of getting people to view things differently, I think, is a really important point. You know, sometimes when I talk to some of our folks inside DoD or give, have discussions with them, I say, hey, just because it's, the process doesn't get you the answer you want doesn't mean it's broken. So you may not like the process, but maybe the answer from somebody else's perspective is correct. And you touched on one of those ideas. Can you give us another example, especially with your time with the SEALs, where it's elaborate more what you just talked about, how somebody views things as differently. It's not necessarily wrong. And
Right.
how we can do a better job of seeing somebody else's viewpoint and seeing what might be right about it.
Different is not necessarily wrong. It can be wrong. It can be abuse or molestation of children. That's different from most of our experience in life. And we all, as across the globe, consider it to be wrong. A lot of folks have contentious disagreement with that. They'll say, well, no, I've heard stories about that group over there. Excuse me. I've heard stories about that group over there or that group over there. And that's one of the biggest problems we have, is that a lot of us are going on what we've heard somebody said. And I'll talk about rape, I'll talk about molestation and abuse of children, I'll talk about Islam. I'll talk about today's condition, today's situation in America, where we're talking, there's all kinds of talk about Islam specifically. Religion, you never talk about religion and politics. I've broken both taboos in the first 17 minutes. And I did it for a reason, because we need to talk about it. We need to talk about my hundreds of personal friends who are Muslims from around the world and in America. We need to talk about the fact that there really is a stealth jihad underway. And I say that in the front of the book too. There's a stealth jihad. If people are going to go to all the trouble of knocking down buildings in New York City and trying to kill, as Yusuf actually planned, Ramzi Youssef was hoping for 250,000 people. That was his first goal. When he took the truck under the first tower and tried to knock it down, his vision was there was a domino effect to knock down both towers and get 250,000 dead people in a matter of minutes. The September 11th attacks had similar aspirations, trying to kill as many people as possible, as many innocent, unknown, completely stranger people, most of whom had nothing personally against, had not done anything personally against the guys that were doing it. So if they go to all that trouble for their external jihad, the lesser jihad, then they're certainly going to keep going. There are guys out there right now. There are guys. Sometimes I wonder in the room when I'm sitting whether there's a guy in the room who's looking for an option. But as I talk about in the book too, that's a tiny minor fraction of the group called Muslims or Islam. I was living, I mean, for God's sake, it's so obvious. I was living with Arab Muslims in the Middle East on 9/11. I went to sleep that night with those guys there. My room wasn't locked. If 19 guys are willing to do what they did against the towers, and they knew they were going to die, wouldn't a radicalized guy who could have the opportunity to kill a few Navy SEALs with a knife on the throat and get spectacular results, wouldn't he be willing to risk his life? The answer is yes. If there were an extremist, if there were a radicalized extremist who wanted to make a statement, which is what terrorism is, making a big statement, using a voice, making an expression, influencing others, simply put, influencing others with a simultaneous expression of weaknesses, helplessness, proving that they have to use this grotesque method to get attention, to get an objective met, to carry out their agenda. These guys are proving they have no other power. They don't want to admit it, they wouldn't talk about it publicly, but they have no other power, no political power, no economic power, nothing that would legitimately let them avoid doing this grotesquerie. So they go that route. So on that subject, we're talking about where different is not necessarily bad or even wrong. 1,000 examples come to mind when I think about my time specifically in the Middle East, was where I spent the bulk of my overseas time in a few dozen countries. Men over there wear dresses. Men in Scotland wear skirts. Don't say that to a Scot. If you are a Scot, please don't beat me up after this, because I know it's called a kilt. But men don't wear dresses in the Middle East. They wear dishdashes. They wear a robe that was designed many, many years ago, many centuries ago, and which many of our ancestors wore because that was appropriate to the climate. Just like when I go on a high mountain peak, I wear lots of layers. When I go out in the desert, I wear very few layers. It was a simple, mechanical, smart choice to make, and not anything that our acculturation can teach us certain lessons about. For example, how men don't wear pink. Great example. Men don't wear pink because it's for women. So I can walk out here and it shocks a few sensibilities. Same thing about men wearing dresses. It's considered very weird, but it's the right thing for the right time. I won't dig down deep into religious practices. I have my own faith tradition. I am a believing. I'm a faith-based person. I'm a believer. I'm being non-specific for a reason, because I don't want to imply that my way is right and others are wrong. In fact, the opposite is not the opposite. A broader perspective. I'm not trying to change minds. I'm trying to widen minds, wide-minding, to open the aperture and to demonstrate that we can perceive others with our. If we have the humility, I call that also manning up and humbling down, if you will. We have to be more courageous to be able to have the courage to stand in front of people and say, I'm open, I'm listening, I'm receptive, I'm vulnerable to what you have to say. Not vulnerable like a doormat, not vulnerable like rolling over. What black belt expert marksman Navy SEAL would be a doormat to people? I'm not interested, I'm not advocating for rolling over and letting people do what they want to you. I'm advocating for having the strength, the courage to stand in front of somebody and say that I see it differently than you, and not but. Because if you say but, it means everything I just said is BS. But I'm standing in front of you, and I want to know what you think, what your perspective is. Because when I've done that in about 10 million opportunities around the world, my experience has been that I'm oftentimes expanded. My mind, I'm edified. My mind is expanded by hearing another perspective on it. I met a Hindu man on a plane one time who told me something about a funny tingle I had when we were talking about a story. And he said, "That's truth. What you just had was truth." And that every time you hear truth, that little tingle on the spine, that means you've just said or heard or thought something that's clearly true and it's in perfect alignment with divine intention. And that was something I've taken away with me. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't talk to my preacher about it, but there's a huge amount of value in humbling down, in hearing what others have to say, in not antagonizing based on misunderstandings. Real quick anecdote. My idiot buddy's in a bar. It's right in the front of the book. Big, studly guy, looked like a Chippendale. Had 2 pitchers of beer, walking through a crowded bar like this. There's a girl in front of him, and he's scooching past to a crowded bar, and she whips around and yells, I can't say the A word, can I? You grabbed my butt. And he says, what? Because he's got 2 pitchers of beer. And she said, you grabbed my butt. Sort of. That's sort of what she said. And her boyfriend turns around, did you grab her butt? And my buddy's like, what? And still looking at these pitchers of beer, and they're raging at him. The boyfriend's getting hostile, like, I want to fight. So my idiot buddy punched him in the face with a pitcher of beer and knocked him out. This is the dance of fools. She's an idiot, he's an idiot, and now I'm making myself an idiot. I could have, in that situation, it literally wasn't me. This literally was a good-looking guy. So literally my friend did this thing. It was an incredibly stupid thing to do, but he didn't have to. It was completely unnecessary. You walk away. The bigger man walks away from a fight. We have all these colloquialisms for describing what I'm trying to say here. And I also say up front in the book, there's nothing new. The same concepts have been taught. The karma, the golden rule, what goes around comes around. These same concepts have been taught for thousands of years. But I think that we have to say them in today's language every now and again. I think that's what powerful peace is.
Was that at McPee's?
It wasn't. It was. I think that was it wasn't San Diego.
All right. I know the audience is going to have questions for you, but so we'll turn it over to them. But I want one last question, just in bulletized format, before we turn it over to the audience here. 2 to 3 main points you want your readers to take from this book. What would they be, and to our audience that's watching?
It's practical to consider the other person's perspective, needs, and grievances. It's not only altruistic. I operate on altruism. I'll give you the best picture, the word picture I can. We need a whiteboard. Picture the accounting situation. Picture the financial books. There's a line, and if you're in the plus, not in the deficit, you're talked about, it's in the black. Your numbers are in the black. Your money is in the black. If you're below the line at a deficit, you're in the red. I have another 4-word thing I can't say here, but I'll paraphrase. Don't be a jerk. The word jerk has been substituted. So don't be a jerk is my 4-word philosophy on life. If you just don't be a jerk, life gets easier and better things can happen. It's that whole thing about being on good terms with all people. The accounting line concept means that if I'm on a flat line, a complete neutral, in the energy sense, I'm giving energy, positive energy or negative energy. I try to give positive energy all the time, and oftentimes when I'm in a low place, I give negative energy. I'm short-tempered. So what is it? You know, what we see all of us do at some point. You have a bad moment, a bad day, but when I'm even at a perfectly neutral zone, and I said, don't be a jerk, it takes no energy to not be a jerk. It takes energy to be a jerk, to be in the red, to be hostile to people, to be a jerk, say, what are you looking at? What's your problem? That is something that I have to go out of my way to do. If instead in that bad mood I could simply flatline through a bad moment and drive on and ignore people around me, I would not be creating hostility. There's a cool commercial where some woman walks into some office and says, good morning, Ralph, and he's had a really bad night, and he says, what's good about it? And she says, whoa, you have to be like that. She walks out of the office, and she's like, does something similar to some other person, some negative vibe, and pretty soon it spreads like wildfire, and you got a brawl in the corporate spaces because it's negative energy spreading around. It takes a spark. It takes somebody trying to do that on purpose. So again, altruism above, altruism in the black, where I spend energy to make other people's lives better. But we don't have to. We don't have to try to want to make people's lives better. Stephen Covey's example: he's on a train, kids are running around wild. There's a dad on the train ignoring the kids running up and down, or a bus or a train running up and down the aisle, and he says, "Excuse me, sir, you know your kids are really bothering the other people." And the dad says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize their mother just died an hour ago, and I guess we don't know how to handle it." And Cubby's like, oh, dude. He didn't say dude probably because he didn't talk like that. But he says in himself, oh, dude, wow. And his paradigm shifted 180. All he wanted to do from that moment on is help the man. It was a human imperative to help the guy. The guy had a desperate need, the kids too, and there was a paradigm shift. We have, in the second chapter, I have 2 little bloody girls on an examination table because it doesn't matter that they're Iraqis. It doesn't matter that it's in Kirkuk. It doesn't matter that Al-Qaeda got them. It matters that they're hurt little girls, and everybody flips that page and goes, oh, dude, little hurt girls. There's blood, they're screaming, they're reaching out. I do that because I want to reach down your neck, squeeze your heart, and give you some kind of a sense of emotion about what we're talking about here. Because when we have that receptiveness that's created through the experience, the connection, human connection, the common ground, then we can get over all this partisan, principle-based argument stuff that we call everybody on that side idiots or traitors, and vice versa. And I don't reject political alignments or economic perspectives. I don't reject any of that. I say that's why I talked about wide-minding. It's not about changing a Dem into a Republican. It's about letting people on all sides perceive that there's more value for me in the middle, where I understand where this is coming from. Because in America today, in the political process being discussed tonight, in the debate, the last debate before a big decision is made, we have 2 warring parties, and somebody's going to lose. I don't mean the guy who's running for president. I mean somebody's 150 million people are going to lose if you have that worldview. If you have the perspective that if that guy wins, I'm moving to Canada, if that guy wins, I lose, and we all lose, and the country's going to hell in a handbasket. That extremist perspective, that kind of rhetoric does not help us say what's really going on with sick kids, with jobs, with abortion, with gun rights, with whatever the topic is. I argue for addressing it on its merits and not on the principle of attacking the other side. In many cases, as I've said before, a party or a group or a race or a faith or a nationality that I've only heard about from other people. Real quick example, most extreme thing I've ever heard about other groups is in Thailand. I went to Thailand quite a bit in my earlier years, and a lot of guys like to go to Thailand because there's grown-up activities to be done there, playgrounds. So they would go there and they would play, and one of these with girls, and one of these guys I was talking to on a Transpac told me, a Trans-Pacific flight. And I went there and I watched the boxers. Literally, I would go to the bars and I like to watch the fighters and get mixed up with the Thai boxing if I could. That's the truth. Some things I say are exaggerated. That's the truth. But these other guys were going over there to play this other game, and they were looking forward to the other game. And they one guy told me, yeah, all Thai women are. He said a word that I won't use here, hookers. And I said, well, real funny, yeah, whatever. And he said, no, seriously, all Thai women are hookers. And I said, what are you talking about, dude? He said, yeah, it's just the culture. Their men put them out there when they're young teenagers. They start training them up so they can be hookers, and they put them in the brothels, known on street corners, and in the bars, and we go over there. It's totally acceptable. He was rationalizing his conduct using I think it had to be fabricated, but a willfully fabricated perspective on how an entire nation of human beings operated. And he said the only ones who aren't hookers anymore is the old ones, and they're just the ones who they run the young hookers. And the men are in on it because they get big money. That's extreme. That's extreme perspectives that is really counterproductive, although it served his purpose, because he could go where he was going and do what he wanted to do with a justifiable reason why it was all appropriate. So don't be a jerk is the first message of the whole concept. And you can imagine what the fourth word really is. I'll tell those after in a private conversation. But sorry, I'm getting stuck on this concept. We are in a time, as I said in the front of the book, we're in a time in which 19 guys with little teeny knives can murder 3,000 people. The goal was to murder many thousands more. It would take me a long time to kill 3,000 people or chop them up, make it divide. My math isn't so good. But 150 people per guy was the average. It take me a long time with a box cutter to kill 150 people, more by far than the people in this room, and they'd be resisting. But there is, this technology enabled it. This was a matter of geopolitical situations. The Freedom in America, which I'm a big fan of, allowed that to happen. There were extreme communications among extremists which spread this. Al-Qaeda's got its Inspire magazine to inspire the next generation. Yay, God, let's go murder some people. We have a time right now that, I'll read it verbatim. We are in a situation right now that is not like the invasion of the Huns, which is a horrible thing, or the Genghis Khan doing his thing. We're in a time when if we don't man up and humble down, we could see incredible destruction, devastation on a global scale. Why are we afraid about Iran developing nuclear weaponry? If we don't identify our situation today as unaffectionate, I suppose, passengers on a sinking vessel, or on a vessel that isn't sinking, we can do something about it. If we work together in this time of very serious technological advances racing ahead of moral and spiritual and emotional causes or values, then we could find ourselves in a really, really bad place really fast by cooperating, by finding ways to cooperate. And by working together and finding that common ground, we can stave that off. We can prevent all kinds of awful things that are coming up soon. Tony Zinni did a speech a couple of weeks ago I was down in Richmond, and he has a book, he likes it. He said, he was talking about the incredible situation on the globe right now. Water scarcity is going to create the endangerment of millions. And danger or deprivation causes unnatural behaviors. A lot of folks just want to go to work, make shoes or make birdhouses or whatever their work is, go home, have a beer or a tea, and hang out with the kids and go to sleep. Globally, I swear to God, I've seen it. I've lived among them. Globally, all colors, all shapes, all sizes, all faith backgrounds, and all language. And I picked up a few smatterings here and there of every language. That's the human experience. We see the layers. We see the layers on top of that. We see the disagreement between political parties. We see the disagreement between the more extreme bits of faiths. Because it's not even Muslims and Christians or Muslims and Jews, although there's a lot of tension there. There are a lot of people in Judaism and in Islam, in Israel and Palestine right now, fighting for the common ground, advocating aggressively for it, because they see what's coming up on the horizon is a very scary thing if we let the technological advances and our ideological divides roar ahead of moral and compassionate human guidance. And that's it. That's the 2 points.
I have to do questions, because if I don't, people that haven't read your book will send me nasty emails.
You don't want that. You don't want to create conflict.
So, okay, we don't want to create conflict, so we're going to get questions. We have microphones. Please, CSIS policy, just if you could state your name and your affiliation, that would be great. Who wants to go first? All right, Nancy, go ahead and go first. All right. The microphone's right behind you. Thanks, Rob.
I'm Mitzi Worth. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. It's a fascinating book. I'm a social anthropologist by training. I guess I have a multiple set of questions.
No, not just one.
No, they're intertwined. What do you do with this concept of winning? I spent a year going through the Pentagon asking every flag officer I knew, what are you going to do the day after you get to Baghdad? And all they wanted to do was get there fast. But the issue was about winning. I mean, and that seemed, the other one is about testosterone. And the third one is about training international relations professors who are all teaching, paradigms and getting them to recognize these no longer seem appropriate, and this is a new way to look at it. But they're all stuck in Cold War way, and they teach it. That's the thing that drives me crazy.
Thank you, Mitzi.
First, give them a copy of PowerPoint, please.
Let me focus your question. Let me focus the question a bit, Rob. Let's talk about the concept. If you could just focus on the concept of winning, because I think that is a good question. I mean, how do you balance, what does winning look like? People say, what does winning look like in Afghanistan? And you touched on that when you talked about the green, red, force issue.
To quote Covey again, the zero-sum solution is not the best way for people to work toward major solutions. His last book was called The Third Alternative, one of his themes he ran through for decades, talking about there's my way, there's your way. The best way is a combination where we actually grab the best bits from each one of them for this third alternative. The zero-sum solution is exactly what I'm on about with today's political process. Tonight's debate and the election in 2 weeks is going to, in some people's perspective, not most, I believe, it's going to create a 150 million losers. That's not helping. The rhetoric, the extreme conversations, the extreme accusations. I almost named a book I won't name, but that speaks very harshly of another party. It's ridiculous. Attacking them as not only not patriots, but rather aggressively trying to destroy America. That's what we hear some of that talk today in the more extreme advertisements. So with the international relations folks, I would say bring them to me. I mean, I would love to actually literally get in among international relations professors who've been reading books for 30 years and teaching ideas that somebody wrote in a book because he was taught that by somebody else who wrote something in a book one time. Because applied smart power, the concept in this book, again, Joe Nye says, hey, keep talking about that. I'll keep talking about him talking about that. We need to grow up and actually address the issues. We need to grow up and actually talk about what is in my greater interests. Is it better for me in terms of winning to have a successful resolution to this discussion? Stuart Diamond wrote a book called Getting More. I recommend it. Getting More by Stuart Diamond. I think he's up in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. But he and I have conversed a little bit. And Getting More is a negotiation, like getting to yes. It's a negotiation book, but his message, like Covey's Third Alternative, again and again, is coming back and saying, there is something better we can come up with. It's not I lose, you win, or you win, you lose, I win, that has any kind of long-term gain. Unless you're in a football game or winning a proposal for a contract you're going after, those are real zero-sum opportunities. But in most of our human experience, it's not about winning and beating, because I've been convinced over these past 46 years that if I beat everybody on my trail, there's going to be a whole bunch of negativity waving up behind me looking for opportunities to beat me back when the time comes. And we don't. It's a small world. What comes around goes around. I will encounter people that I've proven it to myself countless times already. I've encountered a lot of people, including in Uzbekistan, at an airport hotel, face-to-face, a guy I shouldn't have seen outside of America. But we will see others again. We will see each other again. We will see opportunities come up again. And if we just don't be a jerk, we have a much more promising future engagement, even with those we beat in the short term, with a cooperative saying, you know what, this is the best way to go. Let's go with this route. Let's take 75% of my plan, 25% of yours, and make that the overall arrangement. And by the way, real quick, let me go back. You talked about points. I had a third point I wanted to make. Sometimes you have to kill a guy. If you take away, don't be a jerk, know that. That's an important catchphrase. But and we have to be altruistic as much as possible, in my opinion. But you can just be a neutral flatliner. But if you have a guy walking up to your entry control point and you have an M4 assault rifle and he has a suicide vest on and you're giving candy to little Iraqi kids, or as my friend Sean in Chapter 4, Marine Commando, sitting on a rooftop, and if you have a vehicle, a sedan, driving toward your barracks with your Marines in it, just like Beirut, I think this is 2006 that Sean was out there. If you have this vehicle racing up toward your building, and you're the gunny up on top with the gun, and you're standing next to your captain, he says, "You got him, Sean?" And you say, "Yeah, I do." And you go, "Pup, pup, pup," and you see, like the Matrix, 3 bullets go thup, thup, thup through the windshield into the chest of the man, and then you see the vehicle explode because he had some kind of what we call a dead man switch, where maybe your hands are on the wheel, and if you pull away, there's a cord connected to a little clip that if that clip comes off, it detonates immediately. So in case you die, like this guy did, or was on the road to dying real fast, the vehicle blows and you don't just have a dud. You're not going to waste your great jihadi your final move. And he did. So Sean is on the roof and he sees this thing racing toward him, and the captain says, "You got him," and starts to dive down because he's got a pistol and a laptop. He says, "Thup, thup, thup." Three bullets hit him in the chest. The guy twists and pulls, and there's a detonation, and it's maybe 80 feet away from you, and you realize the blast wave is coming for you, and you've only got a 2-foot cap on the roof, so you slam yourself down and it all rolls over you. That was real. That was a person that I know doing a thing that I know that had to happen. Smart power is so commonly mistaken for soft power. Hard power and soft power, kinetics and persuasion, coercion versus persuasion. It is not just about being a sissy. It is not just about being nice to people. Smart power is about having all the capacity in the world. I mentioned black belts and expert marksmen, and I can break people 1,000 ways. I could get a lot of you with a box cutter tonight before you got out of the room. I don't want to. But hard power is absolutely essential to have at our disposal. It doesn't mean I have to use hard power, because when I use hard power, I create the need to use hard power in the future. I create threats around myself. I create an uncomfortable environment. We create our reality. So sometimes you gotta kill a guy, or it's a quick, easy way to remember it, but other ways of using hard power. Sanctions against Iran. We're seeing economic effects in Iran. Now, unfortunately, sanctions frequently have a big impact on the human beings who are below that scumbag administration. There are very good people who resist and dislike the administration as much or more than we do, like a lot of Libyans feel about the jihadis that just murdered our ambassador. We're not talking about the ambassador attack was not about it wasn't about Libya attacking America. It was about a whole bunch of Libyans seeing something go on and running back to their houses because there's bullets flying and grenades flying. The Libyan government is under as much or more threat from those scumbags as we are. And it gets so convoluted in the news. It's all black hats and white hats. It's all simplistic. It's all easy discussion. This isn't a Mickey Mouse world. It's sophisticated. It's complicated. If we go back to our basics, don't be a jerk. Sometimes you got to kill a guy. You can actually help start to piece it together and find solutions.
Well, great. Thanks, Rob. We're going to I think we have time for one more question. Okay, quick one, gentleman over here. We like to start and end our events in CSIS on time.
Good evening. I'm Sean Vandiver. I'm active duty Navy and adjunct faculty at a couple universities. Talking about powerful peace, and one of the classes I teach, we talk about counterinsurgency. I was wondering what your thoughts are on counterinsurgency and how powerful peace plays into the current counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan and around the world.
Well, COIN in general is, of course, not just for Afghanistan. It's for Indonesia. It's for Iraq. I have a very strong opinion about COIN. And I'm called by the counter-coiners, by those who are opposed to the concept of COIN, a coindanista. That's the term that's used by those, just like you talk about, any negative group, the tea-baggers, for example, people that use terms to degrade another group because they dislike that group. They grab a quick phrase, I'm a coindanista because I'm a pro-COIN fellow. However, I want to caveat that I'm talking about what real COIN is, not our misapplication of COIN. Because having a COIN handbook and running into Iraq or running into Afghanistan and starting to follow some of the lessons does not equal doing COIN. COIN is as holistic and whole universal society as powerful peace, applying smart power. It is about understanding the needs of the human beings in the village, about a great movie I recommend. A lot of us in the civil affairs world have done a lot with civil affairs, PSYOP, and information operations, is a Bell for Adana. I think it's called A Bell for Adana. It's an old movie, black and white, about a World War II guy who's put in charge of this village, Adana, and I think it's Adana. And the townsfolk in Italy keep coming to him. The mayor comes to him, the local preacher, and everybody says, can we just help the bad men took our bell away, and we would like to have our bell back. Because the whole town revolves around this bell. It rings for time, it rings for church, it rings for everything that matters to us. And he's like, yeah, I got that, the bell, whatever. Now let's get this bridge fixed here. Let's get the water flowing again. And how about the bell? Can we get the bell going? And so the whole movie is about him ignoring the actual requests of the people. I've been everywhere, and I've heard specific examples in both Kabul and Baghdad of there being accusations of the local population that the Americans are stealing their power. I can play basketball at 2 a.m. with fully floodlighted basketball courts with a latte sitting on the side that comes from the Green Bean Coffee House. It's like a Starbucks. A guy looks in from Baghdad. His daughter is near death because she has some kind of an illness. She's 3 years old. She's weak. It's 125 degrees during the day, and he gets 3 hours of power, and he can't pick which ones he gets. She's in a sweltering house, dying slowly. He can't have access to the medicine they need to give her. He sees me in there playing basketball and sucking down lattes, and he wants to kill me. That's a person who had no antagonism toward me in the beginning. We have other stories about an ODA, an A-team, when I was at Special Forces. I was advising a Special Forces base. And the ODA came back from a mission and told them, it's in the book, told his boss, hey, dude, we went out there and this lady, we got the bad guy. He was a financier helping the insurgency. We tagged him and brought him out. We're getting ready to leave. No violence. Nobody was hurt, but the women and the children are terrified. It's a scary thing to have at 3 a.m. You don't want that to happen in anybody's household, no matter what the guy's behavior or his occupation is. But as they're leaving, the woman says to the man, to the interpreter, these guys didn't rape me. And he's like, yeah, I got that. Because he's an Iraqi interpreter he's out there with the ODAs all the time, rolling in, taking down bad guys, bringing them out. Sometimes you got to kill a guy, but sometimes you don't. You zip tie him or bring him. She said, but the foreign men, the other insurgents who'd come in to facilitate the insurgency in that town, they told us that whenever the Americans came into the house to take our man, they would all rape us. And the interpreter told the commander, the young captain on the ground, dude, here's what he just said. And the captain said, tell this woman to go and tell everybody she knows what happened, the whole truth. We broke your lamp, so sorry about that. We broke your door, sorry about that. We roughed up your husband. The kids were scared. One of our guys pushed you because you were rushing in too close. Tell the whole truth, including the part about the raping. Because when a man is taught by stories, by information operations, getting in his head, psyop for the local population, that his wife will be raped when the foreign men walk in, I will fight to the death, even if I'm a florist. So we need to understand the whole comprehensive experience of human beings on the ground, the green forces especially, that we discount. I wrote a piece called The Vast Green Field, talking about a rugby or a football game on which we have a little red team and a little blue team running all around and bunking each other. But really, this is a live, living, extremely sensitive green field. It's not AstroTurf. It's a bunch of people who will rise up and shield the red forces when we're the worst, when we're the lesser of when they're the lesser of evils. It's the same field that will open up and people will point. Part of the green field will point at the bad guys. Or there's the improvised explosive device under the stage right there. It's right there, dude. Don't go in there today because it's going to blow up. They're going to kill you. These people can, almost every IED, improvised explosive device, almost every roadside bomb that's ever been buried was seen by somebody. That's staggering when you think about all the deaths we've had and mutilations on children, on mommies and daddies and soldiers. Almost everyone that was ever buried was where a guy who wasn't involved in the burying knew about it. He didn't tell. A lot do tell. When the Marines turned it around in the Southwest, in Afghanistan, they turned around and reduced their IED incidents, their explosions, by 90%. They increased their turn-ins by a massive amount because they engaged properly. And that's a very delicate process. You can't know without experiencing the society when it's right to take off the armor and say, we're here to help you, seriously. And we will kill you if we have to. If you do threaten me with a serious threat, I will kill you. I'm ready to do that right now. I don't want to because I want this society to flourish, and I want Iraq to be peaceful, and I want to get back to my mama and babies and have a beer and have a Christmas time. That's reality. So it's not either or. The truth is all in the shades of gray. It's all in the balanced approach. And COIN, properly applied, is an incredible, powerful tool. The problem is we throw a couple of efforts out there. We throw a couple of, okay, we got them radios. We got them a well. What if they don't want a well? What if you go, as happened, to an Afghan village and you build a well so the women don't have to walk 5 miles to the river to bring back water every day? And you come back a few weeks later and you find the well's been kicked in. You say, those gosh darn jihadis. And then you dig deeper on the local environment and realize, wait a minute. The truth is the women kicked in the well because they had to be around the men all day long if they couldn't walk to the river. And I'm not making that up. They destroyed the well so they could keep walking to the river every day, 5 miles each way, and be with each other and talk to each other and have a full human experience of what mattered to them. And we didn't think it through. We didn't plan it all. We didn't understand, have full attunement to that society and what was really important to them, the Balfour done it.
Well, great. Rob, this has been terribly fascinating. I mean, and congratulations on the book, and I know you're just getting off on the tour here, and his website out there too, so please go to the website to keep track of what he's writing about and where he's talking.
That's powerfulpeace.net.
Can I
Couldn't
tell
be
them
much
about
simpler.
the next book?
Sure. Yes, it is. Kindle, Kobe, Sony, iBook, the
And-
works. If it can be on ebook, it's on ebook.
And this is not a one-time thing. The second volume, or second in the series, is underway. So, so Read Powerful Peaceful, you'll be ahead when the second book comes out.
We're looking
But,
to approach the youth. My wife is a special education teacher. I didn't tell you that part. But Cindy is a SPED teacher, and she knows all about the conflict that comes from the frustration of being unable to express yourself or get along in a normal environment because you've had issues in your life. So we're going to start bringing this to the youth, just like Jane Pullen has done in Kentucky.
And then follow him on Twitter as well. But to those of you watching, thank you for watching. For all of you attending, thank you. And then most importantly, Rob, congratulations. And
Thanks very much. My pleasure. We'll be in the back, and I'm available as long as it takes. But I know these guys have to close the doors or something.
No, we can stay here, sign books, talk to the people. We will be here till everyone leaves.
You can also join him on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn and Rob DuBois at Twitter. Let me share.
I was the first person hired on the Peace Corps staff before it was announced. I
Yeah.
tried bringing the Peace Corps to the War Corps. It's only happened recently.
Oh, thanks. You know, we met